As you can tell, I have a lot of books. One might consider me a professional reader. So far this year, I've read 19 books, and I'm gonna tell you which ones are worth it and which ones you should skip. And I am a Christian, so all of these reviews will be told through a biblical lens. Sorry, not sorry. As you can tell, I did get 2 more bookshelves because we were just filling up this space with books. So you guys got a sneak peek of the progress and where I'm at with building my dream home library. But that will be in a future video. Today, we are chatting about the 19 books that I read so far in 2026. And I must say, I have had an amazing reading year so far. You can see I've read a variety of genres, and my average star rating so far for Q1 is 4.1 stars, which is honestly pretty wild for me because I am a pretty harsh rater. Last year was the year that I really figured out what books work for me and which ones don't. So this year I've honestly just had a great time reading so far. So I'm gonna have a lot of good book recs to share with you guys, but some were atrocious, but most of them were good. So let's just get right into it. Starting off with January, I ended up reading 3 books, but I will throw in one honorable mention because I did finish a book on Christmas Eve. So that one technically doesn't count towards the 2026 reading goal, but I'll just mention it in this video because I have some strong thoughts. It is a very popular book that has a cult following, and I'm very much in the minority on not enjoying this book, and that is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I gave this a 2.5 stars, but looking back at it, it's just kind of like a 2. I don't have any fond memories of reading this book, and I just felt like I had to talk about it because nobody has given this book a bad review. I feel like it's literally just me. I went in with the expectation that this was going to be a small town, tight-knit community focused around hockey, and it ended up being just a bunch of immature people in a small town. It would be really hard for me to enjoy my life if I lived in this town because literally everybody sucked. The characters were so flat and just boring that I couldn't connect to them at all. And then with the amount of trauma dumping he did, it was just I couldn't even care for these characters because they were just so shallow. So nothing really hit hard at all. I felt like there were so many crude jokes. There was so much swearing. There was just a bunch of nonsense, and it really just felt like a waste of time to me. So I'm really sorry to report that I did not like this book and I would not recommend. And I actually had all 3 of these books. I purchased them from a thrift store and I just unhauled them all because I will not be continuing the trilogy. But moving on to a brighter note, the first book that I actually read in 2026 was Animal Farm by George Orwell. And immediately when I shut the book, fireworks started going off everywhere because it was New Year's Eve. And I was like, oh my gosh, I stayed up until midnight to read. I wasn't planning on staying up so late. I needed to get some sleep. But time just slipped away as I was finishing this book and I just couldn't put it down. And I could literally sit here for hours talking and dissecting this book, but all I'm gonna say is if you can take a subject so broad and so complex and you can simplify it in a way that doesn't use a ton of words, you've mastered literature, in my opinion. And this was just that. So much allegory, so many hard-hitting parallels on the world we're currently living through. It's truly timeless, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend you guys read this. And Angel Studios is coming out with a movie in May, I believe, and you better bet I'm gonna be in theaters. The next book I read was Wild Dark Shore, and I gave this one a 4 star. There were so many great quotes in here, and it was kind of a thriller, but in a slow burn way. The chapters were short and there was a lot going on, but things happened at kind of a slow pace, but it didn't really feel slow. It felt more eerie. It's not like a thriller where it had your heart pumping, but it was where you just had to keep turning the page and you were just kind of thinking the whole time, where is this going? And then the stakes slowly get higher and higher and higher. My only slight gripe with this book is if you are stranded in a cold, deserted place, there's really no room for miscommunication. All you have is time to talk. But I understand why there was miscommunication because they didn't trust each other, but still, I just thought that was kind of funny. What else do you have to do? You literally have nowhere to go and nobody else to talk to except each other. Although I liked this book, it's not necessarily one that I would recommend to everyone because if you're sensitive to darker tones or slower books, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one for you. And there also was one brief spice scene, but it was not in any explicit detail. And there were a handful of mentions of closed door moments and some instances of explicit language. There was also a plethora of other trigger warnings, but like I said, it wasn't anything in graphic or explicit detail, but it's one that I would be hesitant to recommend because of those reasons. But the prose was lovely. I loved the setting and I loved how the story concluded. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody. And the last book I read in the month of January was The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. This short story collection is kind of going a little bit viral right now. I feel like everybody and their mother is reading this and really, really enjoying it. I too did enjoy this. I gave it a 3.75 stars. I thought it was witty and charming and very reminiscent of Jane Austen. However, it was very clearly a setup book, and I will be continuing on with the series. I did really enjoy it. However, I'm not quite at the level of amazed as everybody else is who has continued on with the series. They say it gets really good kind of like around or after the third book, and the books are only like 100 pages long, so that makes sense. And it's called the Unselected Journals because these are literally journal entries that you're reading. So each entry has a date, I guess you could say each chapter, and they're only a couple pages long to see what Emma's writing about. So obviously this is a very, very quick read, but it is very springy and very fun, and I would recommend. It was clean, there was no spice, there was no swearing, and it was just kind of light and refreshing. So we ended the month off on a good note. Honestly, the entire month of January was a good reading month for me, even though I only read 3 books. It's all about quality, not quantity. But we did up the quantity in February. In February, I read 8 books, and I thought we were gonna start off really strong because I read one of my most anticipated reads for the year, In Your Dreams by Sarah Adams, but I ended up giving this book a 2.75 stars, which really pains me to say because I had such high hopes for this one. However, it's because this series went from being like a cute, hallmarky small town to booktok slop, if you will. I found the female main character just to be insufferable. Like, I have no other word to describe her. It was just really exhausting to be in her mind and to see things from her point of view. And if it's a romance and you're not vibing with one of the main characters, you're not gonna root for them. And the whole point of the romance is to root for them to be together, and I just didn't care. Like I said, this series started off very, very wholesome, but somehow with this being the last book, it ended like typical lust-driven people. You know, I just don't root for that. And I understand it's a secular book. I'm not reading it expecting it to have Christian values. However, the series did start off pretty clean and completely closed door, so it was just kind of a bad progression, and I just didn't like it. I'm sad to report. I wouldn't recommend that unless you like books that have annoying main characters and are lust driven with not enough plot to get you to care. Like I said, I'm harsh, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. Anyways, moving on, I read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I gave this book a 3.75 stars. I have fond memories of reading it. It was an insanely quick read. This could have been a 5-star for me. However, there was some like weird mentions of like blood deals and like mentions of spells, and that again doesn't jive with being Christian. So that's what held me back from being like head over heels for this book, because there was no spice and I don't remember there being any language. There was just a ton of like sizzling tension, which I love. Give me all of the tension and none of the spice. The tension is the best part of the book in my opinion, and I will say this delivered. It wasn't necessarily my favorite fantasy read I've ever read, but it was a fun time. And then the next book I read was The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. Now I had very, very high hopes for this one because The Rom-Commers is like a 5 or 6-star romance for me. And so I'm going through Catherine Center's backlist because I just want to read everything she's ever written because I really, really liked that book. And I think this was her first like strict romance book, because I know she's written women's fiction before, but this one I think was her first like romance book. And the premise of it I did enjoy, and it was closed door, which I appreciated, but even though it's closed door, they're not married. There was, I think, 3 instances of using God's name in vain in here, and there was a couple instances of swearing, which was interesting because I don't remember any swearing or any spice in the Rom-Commers book, so I'm not sure if maybe over time she's like doing that less and that. Why can't I say that? Less and less. There we go. But I guess I just expected something a little bit different based on me reading her newer works, which I really enjoyed, but I still gave this one a 3.75. It was very out there, very outlandish. However, I did like both of the characters and I did like the storyline, but not my favorite. And then next I read The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. Once I finished Once Upon a Broken Heart, I was like, yeah, we're gonna continue. Again, no spice in this book. There's just electric chemistry and tension and angst and all of that good stuff. But you know what's totally unnecessary? Homegirl being married to another man. You want me to root for this person? Not gonna do it while they're married, but like understand because her husband low-key like wants to her, but it's not his fault. He's under a curse and like yada yada, whatever. I just think that whole storyline could have been totally nixed. Like, she didn't need to be married. I personally don't play when it comes to marriage. Honestly, looking back, I don't remember really what the plot of this is. I think it was a lot of traveling around and looking for things. It's more so heavy on the romance side of things. So a lot of fun, a lot of tension. I rated it 4 stars. And then next we have the highest rated book that I read in the month, and that was My Phony Valentine by Courtney Walsh. I gave this book book 4.5 stars, but thinking back on it, I'm like, it's gotta be like at least a 4.75. I can't remember why I didn't give this one 5 stars, because whenever I think back on it, I only have pleasant thoughts. So maybe it should be a 5, but for some reason, right after finishing it, I decided on a 4.5. This is a completely clean romance. No spice, no language, and I haven't swooned as hard as I swooned with this book in a very, very, very long time. Like, this had me literally like giggling and like doing this with the pages. I read this on Kindle and I enjoyed it so much that I bought a physical copy to have on my shelf, because I think this is going to become like an annual Valentine's Day reread. You definitely don't have to read this during Valentine's Day. There's only like a couple of scenes that happen over Valentine's Day. You can read this all year round, but I'm a sucker for hockey romance. I don't know what it is. Out of all of the sports romances, hockey romances are like way higher than all other sports romances that I've read. If you want something swoon-worthy, clean, and sweet with a strong yet gentle man who prays before his meals, mind you, I would really, really recommend this book. Like, there's nothing that held me back from being like, yeah, I'm gonna recommend this to everybody. I think it was so sweet and so refreshing. And this is like a serial series where like there are other books where they're interconnected, but you can read them in any order. And you better bet I will be reading all of them, because I loved this book so much. Please read it. It was so good and so sweet. I need some coffee. All right, come on, Carly, you can do this. Keep the vibes up. Don't get tired. Okay. And next was The Book of Lost Hours by Haley Gelfuso. I think is how you say her last name. I rated this one a 4 stars, and honestly trying to think about how to explain the genre or the premise of this book is really, really hard, because it's one of those books where it is a very peculiar blend of genres and it doesn't really fit one category in specific. This was closed door, and I don't remember any language. There might have been maybe like 1 or 2 instances throughout the entire book, so that wasn't bad. This is a time travel book, so it's kind of like sci-fi, but it takes place, I think, between the 1920s through 60s, so it's like a historical fiction. There's romance in it, and it deals with power, love, and sacrifice. Honestly, all of the things that I love in literature, and I can't really describe what the book is about because it would just spoil everything. The plot was a little bit obscure, but it's a time travel novel. Like, you kind of just gotta go along with it. The prose was magical, and this is one of those books that's going to read like a movie in your mind. So if you're looking for a book that you can just kind of fall into and feel whimsy, I would recommend. Next, is this my first nonfiction that I've read so far this year? Yeah, so first nonfiction book, I have The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And I gave this book a 4.5 stars. I thought for sure this was just gonna be like a 5-star read because it started off so strong. There were a couple of instances where I was like, not sure that I like this tangent that we're going on, but overall I found it very insightful and very grounding, and I did take away some things and applied them to my daily life. So if a book can make me implement changes on how I operate in my life, it's gotta be at least a 4.5. If you are struggling with slowing down in life and just being distracted by the busyness of our society right now, and you feel like you're skimming through life, this book helps remind you about what the easy yoke is supposed to look like that Jesus promises us. And I read this book at a time where I really, really needed it, and I still need it, because that's just something that I struggle with a lot, is making sure I'm intentional with the way that I'm living. There were a few, I think the last 2 chapters or sections of the book kind of got a little bit more personal and a little less Jesus at the full entire center. So I think that's what took this from being like a 6-star down to a 4.5, but a 4.5 is dang near perfect, and I would still really, really recommend this book. It was faith-based, it was practical, and very, very relevant for like a guide for living through today's day and age of noise and distraction. And it's a Christian nonfiction, if you couldn't tell. I personally don't really read nonfiction or like self-help that's not Christian, because if you're gonna do things on your own strength and your own might, it's gonna fail. Jesus needs to be at the center if you want to succeed. And then the last book that I read in the month of February was White Nights by none other than Dostoevsky. I don't know how to say his first name, Fyodor? Anyways, this book is very, very tiny, and you get just the slightest glimpse into the mind of a very much down bad to the point of delusional man who is blinded by his own love and his own daydreams. It was very daft and very bleak, but it was also simultaneously very captivating and very intriguing. But let me just read you one quote that I feel like sums up the book. He says, "I'm a dreamer. I know so little of real life that I just can't help reliving such moments as these in my dreams. For such moments are something I have very rarely experienced. I'm going to dream about you the whole night, the whole week, the whole year. I don't know how to be silent when my heart is speaking." He's just a very messy, melancholy guy, and you can't help but root for him. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a romance. It's more of not necessarily a tragedy, but if you want to read about a Delulu man, I would really recommend. I had a lot of fun with this book and there were so many really, really good quotes. Now moving on to the month of March, I did include a March reading wrap up in my April TBR video, so I won't go too much in depth because I don't want to be repetitive, but if you want some more in-depth thoughts, you can go check out that video. But the first book I read was The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington, and I give it a 4.25 stars. This is a secular book, however, no spice, no language, and there's some strong Christian allegory in here, but it's not a Christian fantasy. However, if you're Christian, you're going to pick up on some very fun Easter eggs. This is a very epic fantasy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of politics. It's very immersive, but it's very long. So that's why I gave it a 4.25. I felt like for it being the length it was, I would kind of want some more things to happen than it did. However, the magic system is really, really creative. So much so that it kind of was a little bit confusing, but I just loved the gentle faith aspects of this book and the found family and the friendships that were formed and the underlying theme being a light throughout the darkness of the world. I just really, really enjoyed it. And I resonated with it a lot, being a Christian, since that's like our whole purpose. If you couldn't tell, really enjoyed this book and I will definitely be continuing on the series, hopefully very soon. And the next book I read was a Christian romance, The Second Story Bookshop by Denise Hunter. I also gave this a 4.25 stars. This was such a nice, light, and fun book to sink into. There were some heavier topics because the plot kind of goes like a little crazy. It's a little out there. It starts off very, very realistic, where a young woman's grandma died and the grandma leaves 49% ownership to her of the bookstore that she had and 48. No, she leaves 51% of the bookshop to her, and she leaves 49% of the bookshop to her childhood lover who broke her heart. So this is a second chance romance, and you guys know I'm usually not a big fan of that, but this one was done very, very well to where I understand why they had a falling out, but it wasn't too much to reconcile. So in those terms, it was perfect. No spice, no swearing, just a very wholesome love story. And if you're a fan of small town bookstore owners, second chance with subtle Christian elements, I would really recommend this one. And next I have The Burning Side by Sarah Demoff. I rated this book a 4.75 stars. I loved it so much, but I have to preface, it is pretty gritty. There are some heavier topics discussed. It's like a family drama and it's about a couple who's getting divorced. But I felt like all of the rougher subjects were touched on with a very realistic and delicate hand. So it really didn't bother me. I wish I could share quotes with you guys, but I can't because this book isn't released yet and I'm not allowed to. But if I could show you my Kindle, there would be probably a bajillion highlights. I was highlighting so many things. There were so many amazing quotes in here about relationships and motherhood and family. Literally, I just don't have the words to do this book justice. I loved it so much. And it's one of those books that I think I would recommend to everybody. There were a couple mentions of spice scenes, but they weren't in any detail. And plus they're a married couple, so nothing wrong with that. But the underlying theme of forgiveness and loving through loss was so strong that like it just really made this book amazing and special. This is the release date. Mark your calendars because you're gonna want to read this one. And then next I have a DNF that I read like 60% of, so I counted it as read because like I read most of it, kind of. It is Terms and Traditions. I started this book in December. I think it might have been my December book club book or November. I'm not sure which month it was, but I did start this and I was having a fun time. It was just a bit slow and I felt like a bit long for it being a romance. I felt like it dragged a little bit. So it took me a long time to read and then I just started reading other books and then March was over and I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna read a Christmas book anymore. So I think I might come back to this one whenever the seasons circle back around because I'm just not in the mood to finish this one right now. There's nothing necessarily bad about it. I think it was just the pacing was a bit slow, but it was sweet. So I gave it a 3-star. And although that technically wraps up quarter one, I will just quickly touch on the books that I've read so far in the month of April. I started off by reading Project Hail Mary because I really wanted to go see the movie in theaters and I give this one a 4.5 stars. I listened to this one on audio and I loved the audiobook. I thought the science was really interesting and there was not a dull moment. There was not a moment that I wanted to put this book down. It was humorous, it was hopeful, and it was just so much fun. We actually went to see the movie as a family and I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 3-year-old and everybody loved it. I'm a little bit mad at myself for putting it off so long, but I read it Gave it a 4.5 and really enjoyed my time. And then next I finished Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This took me months to read. I might have actually started this book in 2025, but it didn't take me a long time to read because it was bad. It took me a long time to read because it felt like every other line was just so hard hitting that I just needed to sit and like ruminate in it because I really wanted it to have the impact that it set out to have. And in order for it to do that, I just had to take my time. And I'm very, very happy I did that. This was a solid 5-star, like no notes. I would go as far to say that this is required reading, especially if you're a Christian. But even if you're not, this is just a really insightful novel, whether you're a Christian or not, because you can get biblical truths and how Christianity is supposed to be, not necessarily how Christians behave, but how they should behave, so that you can understand Christianity a little bit more, because I feel like so many people are put off from encountering Jesus because they encounter a bad Christian. And that's very, very unfortunate, since we are called to be the salt and light of the earth. The fact that we are reason that a lot of people turn away is very, very disheartening. But I think this book does a very, very great job on touching on the simplicity of how Christianity is supposed to be. It was beautiful and I loved it. Highly, highly recommend. And then next, I had another 5-star read. We had a 4.5 star, a 5-star, and then another 5-star. It has been a great reading month so far for me. The You of Golden by Alan Levi. Now, initially when I started this, I was like, okay, this is cute, this is sweet, this is wholesome. It might be like a 3.75, 4-star. But by the end of it, I realized how much I came to care about these characters, and I cried. I didn't cry while reading it, like I was tearing up, but I held it back. But then my husband asked me, how was the book? How did it end? And then I started sobbing. Like whenever I had to tell him what happened, I started crying. Yeah, since I finished it, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. It really touched my heart, and I loved the subtle faith elements in this book. There's a little swearing, there's no mentions of spice or anything, but it's about a guy who is being light in a fallen world. Just the raw nature of love and kindness in this book can't be anything other than a 5-star. The ending killed me though, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. So if you don't want to have a book take up your entire brain space weeks after you finish it, maybe don't read this book, but also read this book, because it was one of my top favorites, possibly ever. My mom is the reason I read that one, because she bought it for me. So thank you, Mom, for making me cry. And then the last book I read so far this month was Ember Gold by Rochelle Nelson. And this is a Christian fantasy. I did love the sweet elements of faith in here. I give this one a 3.75 stars. For a standalone, I thought they did a good job at world building and explaining the magic. It was just written very simply and very plainly. I would say this probably would have been like a 5 or a 6. I'm having trouble speaking today, it seems. 6-star read. If I was like in the 12-year-old age, the romance was just very innocent, very tender, and the prose was very simple, told in first person, which isn't my favorite. I prefer third person, but that made it just really easy to read and really quick to fly through. It was very whimsy, very escapism, very cozy. Not necessarily my favorite, but I would recommend it if you're in the mood for something light and easy, or if you want to dabble into fantasy, I would recommend this. And I did love that it's written by a Christian author with Christian principles. But those were all of the 19 books that I read so far in the year of 2026. Let me know what your favorite and least favorite book you've read so far in Q1. My favorite was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and my least favorite was In Your Dreams by Sarah Adams. But anyways, that's all for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I pray you have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!